Welcome to Career Cravings with your hosts, Dev Ramcharan and Megan Reed. If you crave a better and more satisfying career, this show is for you. We're broadcasting live on Bold Radio Station every week. Now, here are your hosts, Dev and Megan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Career Cravings. You're here tonight with Megan Reed and Dev Ramcharan. And we're going to be speaking to a really interesting guest tonight. So our guest is unique in that she kind of brings together some things that we spoke about last week with Mike Sorsdahl in the military. And our guest a few weeks back, Tanya, who spoke about her career in the arts. So today we are bringing to you Kaylee Cross. And Kaylee is a New York Times USA Today best-selling author. She writes really edge-of-your-seat military romantic suspense, and she's won a ton of awards. So we're really excited to bring her on tonight. The other thing that Dev and I like to make sure or bring through with our guests is that they're relatable to everyone out there listening. So it's very exciting for us that she is a best-selling author, but she's got a really realistic and interesting background that a lot of people could relate to. So just to get things started, I wanted to welcome Kaylee to the show. And Kaylee, I wanted to ask you, who in your mind would kind of be the ideal, or who would you want to speak to out there listening tonight?
Hi, Megan. Thanks very much for having me on the show. I'd like to speak to somebody out there tonight who's listening, and they've had a dream, and perhaps that dream has been put on the shelf or the back burner because life gets in the way and they have bills to pay or they have a family. Maybe they're in a job that they don't love. It's maybe not their dream job, but they have obligations to take care of. And I'd just like to encourage people out there to not let their dream wither and die on the vine. I believe that it's still worthwhile to hang on to those dreams, and you can still pursue them while working. And maybe in time you can even live out those dreams as I have. But I would really like to inspire somebody out there tonight.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And that's why we're so excited to have you on the show. So again, to kind of get things started, because you have had an interesting career path prior to your writing career, can you give our listeners a bit of a background of your career history and some of the highlights along the way?
Sure, I can. I started off, I did a bachelor's degree in history and archaeology, and my intent was to go through and get into physiotherapy. And I tried and tried. I did all the prerequisites, and my grades were good enough, but they weren't in the top 5%. And every year I applied for physiotherapy, I kept getting rejected. And I kept going back to school, taking more courses, and pretty soon I ended up with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Archaeology, and I was no further ahead to my career path. And I accidentally stumbled across massage therapy actually through, I was a nationally carded softball player back in the day, and I had really bad injuries. I needed a couple of knee surgeries, and I was first introduced to massage therapy back then, and that's when I started to pursue it as a career path. So after I had done my degree, I went in and did massage therapy school, which is an additional 3 years. It was in Vancouver at the time. It was a 3-year program then. And I worked for just over about 12 years as an RMT. And all the while, I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was little. And I had been writing little stories on the side. And it wasn't until I was pregnant with my first child that, for whatever reason, maybe you want to blame it on the pregnancy hormones and I got extra creative, I don't know, but I decided that was when I was going to write my first manuscript. And so I wrote it, and I was so proud, and I was all excited, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. I had been attending some writers' conferences off and on, and because I was working full-time, I had a husband, I had a baby coming, I just put the writing aside for the time being and didn't pursue it. I did, however, hire a content editor, a professional within the industry, to look at the manuscript. And she did go through that, and she sent it back to me, and it was so covered in red. I mean, 2/3 of the book she'd cut, and whatever was remaining, it was so bad, I couldn't even look at it. So I was totally discouraged, and I just put the manuscript away and didn't look again. And I continued on with my massage therapy career. And a couple of years later, I was pregnant again with our second child, and I had complications, and I wound up on bed rest for 3 months. And I was laying in bed for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. I wasn't even allowed to sit up. And I would have lost my mind had I not had that manuscript to pull back out. So my husband gave me my laptop, and I rewrote that entire book from start to finish because I was determined. I'd already put all this work in, and I'd always wanted to be a published author. I was going to make this happen, and this was the perfect time. And it also distracted me because I was really nervous about still losing the baby. And so I rewrote this book. And the baby was born, everything was great. But as a mom of two, and I was still working part-time, I was very, very busy. And so I didn't really think too much about the book. I had submitted it to several small publishers, and it did get picked up just by a small digital publisher. And I went with it. And from then on, I started working on the next book and the next and the next. And that's when my income level started to go up. And it's when I started self-publishing on my own rather than going through a publisher in 2013. That's when my income level took off, and I was able to make enough money that I could stop being a massage therapist and write full-time, it's always been my pipe dream.
Wow. So very well summarized. You put a lot of information in there, and that is so interesting. No, that's great. I want to take you way back because something that I didn't know about you was the fact that you are or were a nationally carded softball pitcher. So one thing, I guess, just that I'm hearing from your really initial description of kind of your career history is a key thing that I'm noticing is determination. Because if you are playing sports at that level, you try avidly for that physiotherapy career, and then with the writing, you don't give up on that pursuit. Determination is oozing out of you, I guess. But I want to go back. Can you just tell me or tell us a little bit about this softball background?
Okay, well, there's a really good program out where I live. They're called the organization's called the White Rock Renegades. And we were fortunate because the organization is very well known, and we travel all over the place, and we win lots and lots of provincial and national championships, and we were able to travel into the States, and then we have international tournaments where we're playing Olympic teams and that sort of thing. And I think pretty much all of us got scholarship offers, and I chose to stay at home, but I did get offers. I could have gone and played ball in the States, and I didn't. I stayed here and went to UBC, and I don't regret that decision. But I made some really great friends through there. And the short answer to your question is yes, I'm very stubborn. I'm stubborn and determined, but in a quiet way, I think.
Okay. So from there, I guess, the next thing I'm kind of wondering is how did you said you always loved writing. And I guess in my head, stereotypically, athletes and writers have very different mindsets. So for you, how and why did you begin writing? Like, how did you know you loved it?
Well, I think going right back to when I was a really teeny little girl, my mom still says to this day, I was like a bad smell when I was small. I would not leave her alone. I would always crawl into her lap and shove a book in her face and make her read to me. And she tells me by age 3, I was reading my own books, even little short chapter books by age 3, which is pretty young, but once again, I just was so determined. That was something I loved, and I've always been a huge, huge reader. And I remember about my 5th or 6th birthday, I had asked for a typewriter, and I got it. And I remember being so excited. I opened the box, and I saw the typewriter, and I had family and friends there and cake and the whole bit. And I just remember vividly thinking, I can't wait for, who cares about cake? I just want everybody to go home so I could start pecking out my first story. And I still remember, second everybody leaving, this feeling of relief and excitement. And I went and grabbed the paper that I'd been given, and I put it in my typewriter, and I started pecking out that first little story, which happened to be about a unicorn, I think, and I still have it. And it's always been a dream.
So Megan, I'm gonna just do a little bit more reflecting with her on another aspect of this because this is an incredibly interesting story. So Kaylee, you're a writer, and every writer has a process. I happen to know this up close because I've got about 5 writers in the family, and
Okay.
each
I'm
has.
sorry.
Yep, we're a moody bunch all around. But the thing that's interesting is they each have a unique process. If you could
Mhm.
describe your process as a writer, what does it look like?
Okay. Well, I am a self-professed control freak, and so that means I'm a really detailed plotter. And there's really 3 kinds of writers in the world. There's plotters and pantsers, which are people that fly by the seat of the pants and just sort of write the story and get surprised along with the characters. And then there's people who are kind of a hybrid, and they do both. And I don't work well that way. I do have a very vivid imagination, but I really like the structure of having a really, detailed roadmap in place before I start. Otherwise, I find I'll get stuck, and that just drives me nuts when I get stuck when I'm writing on a deadline. I like the drafting process, I like to be as smooth as possible. So I like to know who the characters are. I like to know as much about them as possible, and then I like to sort of set up the conflict, the external conflict, which is, outside pressures that are affecting the main characters. And I like to know also the internal conflicts, which are, feelings and baggage maybe that those characters have taken into the story with them. And it all provides conflict throughout the whole story. And I need to know all that before I can sit down and sort of lay out the story and the major plot points. And I need to know scene by scene. I like to write out my chapters, just very brief point form notes. And I can change it as I go. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not that rigid. But I do like that initial roadmap, just so I know where I'm going.
Beautiful. For some writers, the narrative itself is a cinch. Dialogue is a bit of a struggle, and for others, dialogue comes naturally to them, whereas the building of the overall narrative structure seems to be something that takes a lot more doing. Which is the easier for you? From what I'm hearing, it sounds like the overall structure, the framework, is what your forte is from the beginning.
I think so, but I actually do find the dialogue easier because it moves the scene forward much more quickly. I write romance, and military romance to be specific, military romantic suspense. And if you have too much narrative, it's really boring to the reader, and it slows the pace right down. So it's different than other genres. If you have maybe a literary fiction piece, you might have more narrative, and you can have more description and more things like that. But in the romance genre, you really need, in romantic suspense in particular, you need lots of dialogue or, little plot turning points that need to keep pushing that pace forward so that the reader keeps, they're interested and they want to keep turning the pages to find out what happens next.
I'm going to ask you. I know that my partner is chomping at the bit. I'm going to ask you one last question. You
Sure.
have described yourself as an introvert. How do you find that's affected your career to date so far?
Well, I'll tell you, we were just at a business trip last week. My husband and I traveled down to Louisiana to attend a writer's SWAT Academy, SWAT, the Special Weapons and Tactics. And we went down to a police academy in southern Louisiana to learn hands-on police and military tactics in the hopes that it would just help me make my writing a little bit more realistic. And when we got there, I'm friendly with everybody and I'll chat with people, but I'm not gonna be the center of attention. I'm not gonna seek out attention. So I'm quite quiet and I'll mostly listen and observe. And the few industry experts that we did meet with, they were encouraging me to travel more and go to more conventions, to meet with readers and do book signings. And I just have to tell you, that's so far out of my comfort zone that I actually made a face. And they were, they're used to dealing with writers, so they know that a lot of us are really introverted. But I'm much more comfortable one-on-one rather than in a group, especially if I'm up on stage or if I'm speaking about something I'm knowledgeable about, that's one thing. But to put me in a room at a signing and stick me, I would just be really nervous. And so I find that for the most part, when I interact online with my readers through Facebook, that's fine. I'm very, very comfortable with that, and I'm very fortunate to have a very dedicated and very supportive group of readers reading my work. But I think that's probably my biggest downfall in terms of I'm not the social butterfly that wants to get out and, go to all these events. And yeah, I think that's my biggest downfall as an introvert.
Megan, are you there? Okay, let's just go forward then. I'll ask another question.
Okay.
So the question is going to be then, given the fact that you've got such it's what seems to be a specialized genre of writing.
Yes, that's true.
Do you think down the pipe you might diversify, or are you going to deepen and enrich further using things like the SWOT training that you had just now?
Yes, that's exactly what I hope to do. I'm very comfortable writing in the genre that I am in, and once you've accumulated an audience, it's a little bit tougher to switch genres now because I have a certain brand that I've built, and when someone sees a Kaylee Cross book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Kobo or wherever, once they've read one, they kind of get an idea of what to expect, and so they will expect that going forward. So if I was to switch gears and write a totally different series, I may even consider something like, creating a different pen name to write a different genre. But my intent for now, for the foreseeable future anyway, is I want to continue what I'm writing. But exactly what you said, I'd like to take my experiences and all the things I learn and inject it into my work so that it's even more realistic.
And so how, Kaylee, did you get into the romance genre to begin with? Why did that genre call to you, or how did you choose that?
I have always loved it. I think I started reading romance specifically at around 12 or 13. And the reason I think romance is so popular, it's one of the biggest genres of adult fiction. It's worth over $1 billion US annually. And it's a safe place because some people don't like romance or they disparage it, and that's really unfortunate because I think love is really the most important thing in the whole world, and if there was more love in the world, there'd be far less problems and far less hatred, and romance is a safe place because there's always going to be, if not a happily ever after, at least the possibility of a happily ever after. You can't have a romance book and kill off your main character at the end of the book because it's not a romance. It just isn't. That's the cardinal rule for romance, is you must have at least a happy for now ending. And life is really stressful, and there's so much pain in the world, and people are going through so much, on their own, and there's all kinds of emotions that we go through. And when you open up a romance, you are guaranteed entertainment, but also it's a safe place, and it's gonna have a warm, fuzzy, cozy feeling at the end. And some are cozier and more fuzzy than others. The whole romance genre, it runs the gamut. There's so many different kinds and subgenres within it. So it's not all light, fluffy, a lot of people, they make fun of, the Sheik's Sacred Baby, and it's not all that. There's so many different kinds, and I just think if you look at the numbers of the people reading romance, it's huge. And it's huge because people want it. It feels good, and it's a positive thing in the world, and I think there should be more of it.
That's an interesting piece of information of the romance genre, and I think it really does maybe give some information to people out there who may have some of those biases or stereotypes. And something else, I guess, along the same lines, I'm wondering is how, you mentioned and you talked about the SWOT Academy and getting that experience to really bring those realistic elements or even more realistic elements into your writing and into your novels. What else, I guess, from your background, your education kind of plays in or supports your writing and that realism in your writing, Kaylee?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I think now this is going to be, I hope, an inspiring answer for people out there. Because when you look at my educational history and my job descriptions going, from being an RMT to now being a full-time author, it doesn't make sense in a linear way. When you look at it, the dots shouldn't connect. But when I look at it in a different light, they do connect because from, my early teens, I've always been a history nut. And most of the history when we study, there's war. There's war, there's war, there's war. So I studied a lot about military, and we've been to all kinds of battlefields over in Europe for World War I and World War II. And for whatever reason, I'm a huge American Civil War buff from the time I was about 12. And I've dragged my poor family back east to Virginia and Tennessee and Georgia and going into Gettysburg and Pennsylvania, going to so many battlefields because I love it and I want to understand the story and I want to be there where it happened. And so it was natural for me to do my degree in history, and archaeology was also sort of a natural fit because it fit into my interests, and I just enjoyed the courses a lot. And so I finished this degree, and as I told you, I went on to be an RMT, and now I'm an author. Well, how does that all fit together? Well, now I write about military characters, and I write about male and female military characters. And so I've got a lot of knowledge that another person might not have just because of the time and effort I've put into studying them and reading about them. The other thing that I use all the time is the medical information that I learned during my massage therapy course, my 3-year massage therapy course that I took. And I use it all the time because in my books, of course, there's lots of, hair-raising, dangerous situations. My characters are always getting hurt or injured or shot or whatever it is. And so I actually use my military knowledge and I use my medical knowledge all the time. And it's just, I find that so fascinating how my path has actually helped me become the writer I am today.
I think that is fascinating, and I think that should be inspiring to people out there listening, that you like you said, your path hasn't been linear, but it all ties into where you are today. So interesting.
Yeah. It shouldn't make sense on paper when you look at it. So I hope someone listening out there, whether maybe you want to be an artist or you've got a great invention idea or whatever it is, your background will, in whatever way, it'll highlight and enable you to chase that dream. And it'd be really interesting for people to examine that.
Exactly. And I think really the other thing that I find interesting is we talk so much and on this show about transferable skills, but in your case, I think it's a lot of transferable knowledge, having that knowledge influence your writing. I'm gonna turn it over to Dev now.
Okay.
So Kelly, you talked at the beginning about the sort of the person that you want to envision as you work to inspire them with what you've been through. You talked about somebody who is stuck in the daily grind. They're a responsible person. They may have a family. They have bills to pay, but they have a dream on the side. Now, if you could describe when you yourself were in that particular situation, and what was it? What triggered, apart from if there was anything beyond the story you told us about being laid flat out, and then writing is what helped you and saved you. Yes. But is there anything else you'd say to people to inspire them?
Well, and again, this is just my opinion, so of course take it with a grain of salt. But I wanted to be really practical and careful as I pursued this because obviously money is important. We need to pay our bills. We need to feed our children and pay the mortgage and all that. So I wanted to make sure I had the income while I was sort of pursuing this on the side. And my husband is an accountant, and we reached the point one year we were looking at our taxes and our income for the previous year. And I was sort of lamenting that, I loved my job as an RMT, but it was very physically demanding. And I was tired because most of the shifts that I was working were all evening and weekends. And when I was home with 2 little people under the age of 4 all day long and then went to work at 3 p.m. and didn't get home until 10, I was exhausted. And it just felt like I was on this treadmill and I couldn't get off. It was just be home with the kids, look after the kids, look after the house, go to work, come home. I was tired. And I remember saying to my husband, I would just love to be able to be home with the kids all day, but I'd like to be able to write because I love it and I have stories to tell, and I'm sort of frustrated that I felt kind of hamstrung. I know I need to make money because I need to contribute financially and help us pay the bills, but this is my dream and this is where my heart is. And he said, well, let's give it a year. He says, you can leave massage therapy for now and try writing full-time for 1 year, and if you can make more money at that, than you did at massage therapy, then by all means, stop your work as an RMT and write full time. And I was really fortunate to, have his blessing and support, but very, very lucky that I was able to produce enough books that people seemed to like, and it allowed me to build my income to the point where I could stop my day job. And I know that wouldn't always happen for everybody, so there was a little bit of luck involved for sure. But I just want to caution people out there, don't quit your day job until you're sure that you can sustain the level of income that you need, because life is stressful enough, and I would hate to see somebody jeopardize, what they've worked for. And while I want to encourage you to not let go of the dream, I would caution people to be very, very practical about how they go about it at first.
So a really interesting combination, I guess, of the practicality, but also the dreamer side of things, and definitely the message that, you were not willing with two young children to be the starving artist. Rather, you wanted to go about it practically and make sure that it was a smart transition for you. So I think that's a valuable piece of information too. And I like even that plan that you and your husband came up with to, give it a year, give it that time frame and see, okay, what can occur in that chunk of time, and then make decisions from there. So really great advice. I have another question, and it's more regarding your kids. So with your genre of writing, some could say it's a little taboo. So how does that play out with your children? How old are they, and how much do they know about your writing?
They are 10 and 12. They're both boys. They both know what I write. They are not allowed to read what I write until they're older. But they know that there's, intimate things. We haven't had the talk with the 10-year-old yet, so that's a nebulous idea to him. He doesn't really understand it, but they're cool with it. They think it's neat that Mom writes books for a living. They were especially thrilled. We were at a family vacation in Disney World a couple of years ago, and we were standing waiting to get into an attraction, and a reader recognized me and called me by name, and my kids were floored. This woman came over with her husband and children and hugged me and got my autograph and pictures, and my children, they were just absolutely floored because they're like, it's just my mom. Like, they couldn't believe that somebody knew who I was, and let alone in the middle of Disney World. So that was kind of a highlight. That's something I'm going to remember for a long, long time.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's good story. So switching gears on you a little bit, I'm wondering, what would you say is your most valuable asset? What's your most valuable asset, Kaylee?
I'm going to repeat what I said to Dev. I think it's my determination. I am determined. I don't know if it's determination or if it's just plain stubbornness, but as I said, it's a quiet way. I mean, I'm not an in-your-face person, but if I decide on something, I'm going to make it happen. To the best of my ability. I'm going to chase it down, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make that happen.
As you were telling us your story, it occurred to me there must have been moments of struggle and darker periods as you pursued what was really quite an independent path. Can you tell us about some of those times and what got you through?
Sure. Well, I'm sure a lot of people out there, if anybody out there is an artistic type who's listening to me, whether you're a songwriter, a singer, an actor, an artist, anybody that's artsy, it's a pretty brutal world out there. Rejection is just so hard. And when I first started to write, I wrote my first manuscript, I had it polished, and what you do back in the day, this is before self-publishing really took off and was a viable means of making a living, you had to pursue publishing through an actual publisher. And that started with, you had to chase down a literary agent. Well, you send out these queries to literary agents, and if they even bother responding at all, you'll get, 99% of them will send back just a form rejection. Thanks, but no thanks, best of luck kind of thing. And it's just, you get the door slammed in your face so many times. And I think what got me through is I was in the same boat as everybody else, and I understood from the research that I had done and the conferences I had attended that it's a really tough industry. And I'm sure, Hollywood is the same, and so is Broadway and singing and trying to get an album made or anything like that. It's the same. There's tons and tons of rejection out there. I was fortunate enough to find a very small publisher that would take me on at first. Then I got published with Harlequin, a division of Harlequin. And then when the self-publishing wave really started to take off, I was very leery to jump on that because, I was very worried about what would happen to my income or whether or not I had an audience big enough to follow me. I was very fortunate that it turned out I did have a big enough audience. But I think that the darkest parts throughout my story would be that constant rejection. And, you'd have an author friend who, I just got a 6-book deal with a big New York publisher, or I just got my dream agent. I just signed with my dream agent. And here's me, can't get an agent. Nobody in New York wants to talk to me. And that was really frustrating. And it did make me doubt myself. But then again, that quiet stubbornness came through. And it's just a question of perseverance, I think, really. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was Stephen King. He almost gave up publishing. And the gist of it is, I wish I knew the quote. I should have looked it up. But the only, writers get published because they just don't give up. They keep writing until they get published. That's really the difference between a published author and an unpublished author, is the published author just kept going until someone said yes. And I think that's kind of my story. I've never been, even with my sports or my schooling, whatever it is, I'm not the top 1 or 2% kind of person. It's not a natural talent that I have. I've always had to work for whatever I wanted. So as an athlete, I had to work a lot harder than a lot of other girls I played with because they were more naturally gifted than me as an athlete. So I worked harder. And I'd say the same thing for my schooling, and I definitely say the same thing for my writing, is I just kept doing the best I could, kept trying to improve. I just kept plodding along, and finally someone said yes. And all it takes is one yes. And then it just, I think that's the key, is yes, you're going to be told no. That's the tough part. And you have to dig down. If you really want it, you'll keep going. And you can't let the no's define you. And yes, they will get you down. And a lot of artistic types, we tend to be very, very hard on ourselves. And there's depression and anxiety issues riddled throughout that entire community. But if you know you're in the same boat and you just keep plugging along, that's my biggest takeaway from tonight. I just want to tell people that all it takes is one yes.
Wow, that is really inspiring, I think, and I hope that does inspire someone out there, whether they are a writer or they have some other passion, because I think hearing your story and where you came from and what you did for different careers or ways to make money, but then ultimately following your passion and making it work, and you got that one yes, that's really inspiring. I'm so happy to hear that. One thing I guess that I'm curious about, do you have any guesses or any ideas as to where that quiet stubbornness or perseverance came from?
Not really, except that I don't know if this could be psychobabble for all I know, but I was very, very premature when I was born. I was 3 months premature, and when I was taken by C-section, I was actually lifeless. I didn't have a heartbeat, and they were very, very concerned when they actually resuscitated me that I would have brain damage or have some terrible crushing disability. And I just had this tremendous will to live. My parents said right from day one, when it was very touch and go for the first 2 months, I was in an incubator. They weren't allowed to touch me. This is, of course, I'm 41 years old, so this is back before all the, wonderful NICUs that they have now. And I just had that quiet determination. I was a fighter, and I have been since the day I was born. And sometimes I wonder if that's what it is that helped shape my personality. I don't know how much of that has stuck in my subconscious mind. I certainly have no memory of being in an incubator, but I just wonder sometimes how much of that actually affected me and my personality.
Oh my gosh, that is. Does
that sound weird? Does that sound totally woo-woo? And
no, it doesn't. I have no clue if that would be a reason. But what I do know is that the development of your brain happens the most at the youngest ages. So hearing that story, being a fighter right from the beginning, the neurological impact that may have had on you, that very well could be one of the reasons or one of the factors in you being such so quietly stubborn, I guess.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's the only thing that's my only guess.
Yeah, and I guess even that makes sense when you were talking about, always just being by your mom and wanting that story read. I guess even that's an example of, you didn't give up. You kept poking away at wanting to get what you
I drove
wanted
her crazy.
in the situation. Wow. So moving, I guess, a little bit further into the show, I'm wondering if there's anything in your life or in kind of your career history that you regret or that you would do differently if you could turn back the clock.
That's an interesting question. I believe I will say I regret not self-publishing sooner. And my best friend, she's also a New York Times bestselling author, Katie Reyes, and she was encouraging me for 2 years before I started to self-publish it. She was trying like mad to get me to self-publish, and I was just too self-conscious and worrying and wringing my hands and, I can't do that. Nobody would buy my books. And, now that I look back, hindsight is 20/20, and I wish I had jumped on sooner. I don't regret, waiting to publish in the first place. I don't regret being a massage therapist and then transitioning into being an author because, plain and simple, I would not have been able to help support the family financially unless I had a full-time day job starting out. So I don't regret that. The thing that I hope I don't regret in the future and as I get older is writers spend an awful lot of time on their computers. And sometimes if I don't get my daily word count in on time or something comes up where my schedule's all higgledy-piggledy or I have a deadline or other things I need to get finished, then I work in the evenings and I'm working weekends. And I'm very careful to try and strike a good balance between my work and my family because at the end of the day, my family's the most important thing to me, and likewise my health. And if you don't have your health, life just is a horrible struggle. So I make sure that I'm very cognizant and appreciative of my health, and I don't want to ever regret not spending enough time with my husband and children and my other extended family. Because I don't think I would ever lay on my deathbed and regret, I should have written, 4 more chapters or 3 more books. I'm afraid that one day I would look back and regret missing out on, more time spent on the weekends or in the evenings with my family. So that's something that I'm very aware of, and I've made adjustments accordingly in my schedule to make sure that my weekends are mostly free. I don't want to regret that looking back. And that's something that I would also hope people would look at too. You want to chase your dreams, but you don't want to lose sight of what's really, really important in the meantime.
Kaylee, as a writer, there are other writers that you will love. And if you could tell us who are the writers that you draw the deepest inspiration from, the ones that you love the most and go back to continually as a writer?
Oh, boy. I have a lot, and it's not all romance. It's mostly romance, but I think my favorite author ever, and it's J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. I love her as a human being. She's a hugely philanthropic woman. She's got a giant heart. And what I love about her story, she had it much tougher than I did. She was a single mom struggling to make ends meet, and she actually had written Harry Potter on a series of scraps of piece of paper and napkins. And she kept getting rejected, and she was rejected and rejected. And it was this teeny little British publisher that finally picked up the first book. And look at her now. It's the best-selling series in the entire world. And she's inspiring for that reason. And I also just love her pure imagination that she put into those books. And I love that she inspired young people to read again. When her books would release, they'd have these big parties at the bookstores, and they have TV crews that were there filming. They have young readers all dressed up in costumes that had lined up around the block, and they interview little people that had been saving up their allowance or Christmas money for 6 months so that they could buy this book because they love to read and they love the story and they love the magic of it. And I think to me that's the most inspirational writer that I can think of. I think a close second would be Malala Yousafzai. She's the young Pakistani girl who was shot in the head by the Taliban several years ago. And she's brave. She is a million times braver than I would ever be. And I think her story is inspiring, but she's definitely got that unshakable determination and a confidence about her that is far beyond her years. And I find both of those people extremely inspiring.
Is philanthropy something that's important to you as an author and as a person?
Yes. Not just giving back to the romance community, which is a very tight-knit, very supportive genre, which I'm fortunate to be a part of, but I'm also part of a scholarship foundation here. My family runs a scholarship foundation out here in the Vancouver area, and it's for BC students, and we send, depending on what budget we have for that year, we send X amount of students off to university for an undergrad degree. And so we take disadvantaged students who have gone through a really tough time. Maybe they've lost parents, maybe they're homeless, maybe they, got into an addiction situation, and we try and give them a little hand up because we believe that education can transform the world. So that's always important to me too. I want to give back.
Well, I got to tell you, listening to your story, I'd have to say you're truly a great woman. And it's been
well, thank you.
Listening to your story. It's been inspiring for people of all ages, because what really seems to ring true in everything that you say is that there's an absolute heart. It's not just the determination to succeed, but the determination to succeed in a meaningful way. And that's quite different to just succeeding for the sake of succeeding. And it's truly something we appreciate a lot in hearing this kind of story. So I'll turn it over to my colleague now.
So something we always like to ask our guests, Kaylee, and something I'm curious in your case is, what, if you could turn back the clock, what would you tell your 21-year-old self if you knew what you knew today?
I would tell myself to go for it, because even though I was determined and I was stubborn, there was always that little voice in my head, that little self-doubt whisper, oh, you're not going to get published, you're going to get rejected. There's always that sort of nervousness and the I call it the self-doubt monkey. And I wish that I had just told myself, just go for it.
Well, and it sounds like that is what you did in the end. So it sounds like that self-doubt, even though it was there, you overcame it anyways, because look at where you are today. So one more question. We're just about getting to that time for our break, but I'm wondering, what are you grateful for? What are you most grateful for in your life right now?
Oh boy. The two things that immediately come to mind, I'm most grateful for my family, and number 2 would be my health. And number 3 would be that I am able to pursue my dream. I'm able to make a living doing what I've always dreamed of and doing what I love. And even on a tough day where things aren't going well at the computer or the story's not coming, I always take a step back and remind myself, do you know how lucky you are that you get to sit here and you get to make up stories for a living? So then I tell myself to shush, no complaining. That's it. You are so fortunate compared to a lot of people in the world who are out there working because they hate their job, but they have to get up and go anyway. So you just be quiet and be grateful for what you have and start putting words down on the page. Okay.
And one last question just before we finish things off. I'm wondering, when you come to the end of your career and you're having, say, a retirement party, what would you want people to say about you at that time and about you, about your career? What would that look like for you, Kaylee?
I would like people to say that I spread love. I think that would be a huge compliment. And by writing romance, I hope I am spreading love, and I hope I am spreading hope. And I think the world would just be such a better place if everybody could spread a little more love. And that would be one of the best things that anybody could say about me, I think.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think such an inspirational way to end end the first segment of our show today. So I want to thank you very much for speaking with us today, Kaylee, and sharing your story. Before we switch or we move into our break, is there anything else you wanted to say before we make that change today, Kaylee?
Sure. Well, thank you once again for having me. And to anybody out there listening who has a dream they want to pursue, I just want to encourage you, just keep at it. Don't give up. And one day you might get the yes that you've always been hoping for.
And with that, we will go to our break. So we've just heard from Kaylee Cross, a best-selling author. We've heard all about her career, and what an inspirational guest today. She made it very clear from the beginning that she is talking to the average Joe out there in the grind, working, but someone who really has a passion and a dream to do something that they love. And in Kaylee's case, that was writing, and writing in that romance genre, and specifically that military romance suspense. She told us right from the time she was a little girl, she loved having stories read to her. Something else I think that she mentioned was that idea of being born prematurely and being a fighter right from the get-go. And that was something so evident and so predominant of a theme throughout her life and her career, from the time she spoke about being a softball pitcher and nationally carded, something obviously she had to work very hard at, through her education and continuing to pursue those goals, and then with her writing. And even though there were hiccups along the way, she didn't give up. She kept going. And that is such a valuable message for people out there. Something that I find really interesting and useful as well from everything that she shared is that practicality that backed that dreamer persona that she had. And I think that practicality of having a family and, needing to support the family, make an income, that underlied her choices as well. So I think she was very strategic in the way she developed her career as an author. Even I guess in her writing, very practical. She spoke to us about those different types or different styles of writers, ones that are plotters, ones that are panthers, and hybrids. And that's new information for me. I never really, I guess, thought much about how someone goes about writing a novel or writing a book. It just seems way over my head. But I think even that practicality of plotting out her story in advance, and of course making changes along the way, but really getting in-depth and detail-oriented with the characters, the conflict, the scenes. So that was really interesting for me to hear, and I think again goes with that practicality. Something else that stands out for me is, I guess, that giving back and wanting to help other people, wanting the world to be a happier place, where love is really, I guess, at the forefront. So really, I think that can be a goal or an underlying, I guess, voice that lots of different careers could have. And this is just the way she chooses to express that and push that belief forward. She shows that through her philanthropy as well, in supporting others and helping others pursue their dreams. And I think that's beautiful and so inspiring that someone who followed their own dreams and persevered through that to be successful in that can give back to other people. One other element that stood out to me, and I don't think we've talked about this so much on the show before, is really keeping her values at the forefront of everything. So while writing is a passion and she loves it and it's an income generator, she knows that her family and her health are the most important things to her, and she cherishes those things, and she makes sure that her writing doesn't interfere with those things. She makes sure as best she can that she has weekends off to spend time with her family, and keep her health in check. And I think that's something that everyone listening can struggle with at some point, really, that balance, and feeling like I have to do this, I should do this. But really, in her case, she knows that if those are the most important things, that's what she needs to focus on. And so another great message for everyone out there listening. Another element that, again, something I never thought about with a writing career is that difference between having a publisher and self-publishing. And that, I think, could be really useful information, again, especially for writers out there. You know, there is so much rejection in the creative careers that are out there, and writing being one of those, where you are really submitting yourself to judgment, rejection, feedback from other people. And in her case, she did move forward with a publisher, but then made that choice to self-publish, and that is brave. And that's something I think, you know, just in coming to a bit of a conclusion with what I have to say, and what I would say about Kaylee is really that inner bravery and perseverance are how I would define what she spoke about tonight. She calls herself a stubborn introvert. And to me, that quality didn't come out on the show. She's so well spoken. She had amazing answers and interesting information. And she didn't take no for an answer. So even though she was an introvert and might be a bit shy, bravery is definitely what I see coming from her in choosing this career path, and in self-publishing, and in keeping that balance in her whole life. So I guess that's what I pulled from our guest today. Dev, I'm going to turn it over to you. What did you think about Kaylee today and the story that she shared?
She's amazing. An amazing guest, an amazing person, and really a profile in courage. When I look at the story and I reflect on the things that she's talked about, really it started from the time of her birth. She was born early, and as a premature baby had to fight for every breath that went into her lungs. So from the very beginning, life for her has involved companionship with struggle. Struggle has always been something that's been a close fellow to her as she's been through her life. And so, as she noted, she has always had to work a little bit harder than the people in the top percentile of the classes and organizations she's been involved in. And she started that from the time she was a premature baby. And it's been her mode all the way through. Just keep working at it, keep pushing, keep on keeping on. That's been a wonderful thing to see. The introversion aspect, thinking about the book Quiet by Cain, really brings out an obsessive ability to imagine her way into other people's worlds with great depth and insightfulness. That's something that's very common amongst people who are introverts, and it's obviously something that is in her because of the kind of writing that she does, her ability to imagine her way into lives and into situations. She has an innate curiosity about the way things fit together. What larger scale movements and changes in the world around us do to individuals and their relationships. Tolstoy did the same thing with War and Peace. He talked about the overall movement, transitions and gear changes of history and what was happening between France and Russia. But at the same time, he looked at little people and their one-on-one relationships and struggles and trials. And what was going on in history brought out in stark relief the beauty and the richness and the wonder of their individual and small-scale relationships. She said that as she moves off into time and one day looks to retirement, what she wants to hear is not that she was the richest author who ever lived or made the most impact in this or that area or was somebody who led this or that movement. What she said is something that in many ways is incredibly profound. She said she wants to hear people say, "I spread love," and did it through writing romance novels. Now, I've got to tell you, Meg, for me, romance novels have been something that weren't even slightly of interest or curiosity. But because of this interview, I'm going to go find her books and start reading them. And my wife is going to be shocked, but it's because of the inspiration of the woman and her character and her personality, what she's actually had to think through and overcome to be able to do what she's done. Now, I know what rejection as a creator feels like, as an artist, and how easy it is to just fold up shop and walk away. But she never did that. She hasn't done that since she was born, and she never will do that in the future. And that in itself, I think, is an inspiration for anyone. We've seen someone who is a wonderful profile in courage, stick-to-itiveness, as the Brits say. She keeps calm and carries on and keeps on pushing through to completing the things that she starts or wants to do. And what greater inspiration could we actually have than that? It's been a real pleasure to speak with her. And I hope for all of you as our listeners, you found this story from Kaylee equally as inspiring to you as it's been to Megan and to me. This is Dev Ramcharan, and for Megan and myself, thank you for being with us as we've spoken to our guest, and we hope to have you with us when we have our next show.
The career discussion doesn't stop here. For more information about how to transform your career, visit CanadaCareerCounseling.com. And remember to tune in next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Bold Radio Station for the next episode of Career Cravings.